All right, I will call to order this meeting of the East Hampton Planning Board for August 1st, 2017. First of all, is there anyone here to speak to something that is not on the agenda tonight? All right. Planning Board minutes, did people look at those? I didn't see those.
They
Okay.
didn't. I'm sorry.
That's all right, no big deal.
I did not get to type them. We'll have them for the next meeting.
Perfect.
I promise.
All right, moving along. Jamie, there's no A&Rs tonight, is that right?
Correct.
All right, no old business, no new business. Moving right into administrative items. Recreational marijuana, board discussion on the purpose statement for a new zoning ordinance for recreational marijuana. And so just to give people background for who hasn't been here, there's been some prior discussion about this, and the first step we sort of talked about was trying to decide how to phrase what's called a purpose statement for a bylaw, which sort of gives a general description of what the concept and goal of the statute would be. It does have some weight and authority, but it's not the sort of operative sections of the bylaw, so it's really, I think, another opportunity for us to hopefully hear more from people in the community about sort of what they envision and where different people would like to go with this and get the ball rolling. So James put together a brief statement that was a draft. That's sort of the jumping off point for our conversation tonight. I guess I'll probably just read it so everybody can hear it, but the statement of purpose would be to provide safe and effective access to recreational cannabis in East Hampton per Chapter 334 of the Acts of 2016 and General Laws Chapter 94G, Sections 2 and 13, and to regulate the time, place, and manner of operations of cannabis establishments in a manner that promotes the character of East Hampton and that is not, quote, unreasonably impracticable, end quote, and does not otherwise conflict with the Act. So that's sort of the jumping off point. Jim, I don't know if you have anything you want to add about that before we open this up, or how you want to.
Well, there's a lot of people here, and I would love to hear them all talk. I would like to just add a
Sure.
little bit. The statement that we are working on a statement of purpose as a start is absolutely accurate, but it's a statement of purpose for zoning bylaws, which helps to understand where businesses that want to do things with recreational marijuana can and how they can operate within the confines of the state law here in East Hampton.
Yep,
one
that's
of
good.
some low-level stuff. There are some things I'm guessing some folk are going to want to talk about here tonight that we can't, I'm not sure we can discuss, but until a ballot measure is passed, which requires a petition, we really can't touch, and that would be consumption. And I'd like to just toss a piece out because I think it's going to be an important component to what people here are for. And this is something I personally would love to see happen. I want to see this petition made. I want to see a city councilor pick it up and run with it. But there's a gentleman in the audience today who sent me this, who was critical, pivotal in drafting the legislation we currently have in Massachusetts. That's Dick Evans sitting there. And he sent me this when I asked about consumption, because I knew a lot of questions about it. And currently in our law, it says the city council of a city and the board of selectmen of a town, upon the filing with the city or town clerk of a petition signed by not fewer than 10% of the number of voters of such city or town voting at the state election preceding the filing of petition, and 2, conforming to the provisions of general laws relating to initiative petitions at the municipal level, requests that the question of whether to allow in such city or town the sale of marijuana and marijuana products for consumption on the premises where sold be submitted to the voters of such city or town at the next biennial state election. If a majority of the votes cast in the city or town are not in favor of allowing the consumption of marijuana or marijuana products on the premises where sold, such city or town shall be taken to have not authorized this consumption of marijuana and marijuana products on the premises where sold. So we're talking about a bylaw. There's going to be different kinds of businesses that want to come in. We're discussing a bylaw, hopefully, that will allow us to talk about growing, cooking, testing, and other aspects of it. But when talking about consumption, before our community can do something about that, we've got to go through that process according to the current state law. Now, I think I mentioned just in passing that 63.5% of our community here in East Hampton voted in favor of recreational marijuana, the current marijuana legislation. It's my belief personally that such an effort looking for 10% of the population would be successful, but someone's got to pick up that torch and run with it. The other thing I want to add is that we're talking about a statement of purpose for zoning, but for what? And I feel like one of the key things that we need to iron out is, are we creating 10.10 in our zoning, where 10.9 in our zoning bylaws is our medical marijuana? Are we creating a new recreational section? Are we creating, or are we augmenting 10.9? Modifying the title, creating new definitions, injecting into the existing legislation, or zoning I should say, it's not legislation, zoning, a concept of recreational. I have an opinion on that, and that's that we shouldn't try to create a brand new thing. It'll be a lot more effort, and rather do the minimal effort we can to inject into 10.9 the medical modifications that allow 10.10, that allow recreational, I mean to say. But I think that's something that we need to discuss.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think part of that, and it's a good point about thinking about what we're here actually to discuss. So there's a lot of different aspects that aren't before us, some of which, you know, Jim mentioned sort of the consumption aspect. I know people have also talked about sort of the process for how do you go about trying to ban that in the town. None of that is what we're dealing with here. So this is just sort of the use under the law as it stands in East Hampton now. Similarly, issues with taxation and stuff like that wouldn't be before the planning board, so we wouldn't have anything to deal with there. And then the other sort of black hole here is that we don't yet have the state regulations. So when we did this for the medical marijuana, we had pretty comprehensive state regulations sort of dealing with the medical facilities and the sale and all of that. And we don't have those yet, which sort of makes it a little bit harder to sort of try to get out in front of that, but not impossible to sort of try to get certainly a feel of where we want to be going and sort of getting an idea of a framework of what we would do, trying to anticipate where that is. Those are due, I think, by March 15th of next year. So obviously the sooner we get that, the better, to sort of give us more guidance on what the state's going to be wanting us to do too. But that's sort of what we have here for a limited purpose. But I think this will hopefully be one of many more nights when we can hear from people as it all sort of unfolds. So,
You said the state, is it a reg, is it an actual regulation, or we got guidelines, or what is it?
I mean, presumably it'll be regulations comparable to what they did in medical marijuana, which are incredibly comprehensive. I mean,
Right.
we had little to really worry about when we drafted our bylaws. It largely adopted what they had, and there was some wiggle room where we could sort of change some stuff, but we don't really know at this point what shape those will take.
Okay.
Like Jim, I went online through various states that have they're already way ahead of us. They've already instituted theirs in their states. And when you look at it and you say, can we institute that here in Massachusetts? We're completely different. They're, you know, if you take a Midwest state and try to infiltrate it into Massachusetts, it can't be done. Their type of, the way they did their laws, they're more open. And I don't know how we can do medical marijuana with a store that's going to sell an everyday smoking marijuana, and where we're going to put it, how we're going to put it.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the
But-
process we're here now. Is
And
there's gonna be
how
a
are
lot
we
choose
going to
from.
do it when the state hasn't even, they're not even sure.
Well, I think at the very least it doesn't preclude us from starting to talk to the community and be thinking about where we want to go. I mean, I think that
It's
certainly
going to
makes
be a
sense.
rough road.
I don't really
It's gonna be
see I mean, I get that there's more to come out, and I agree with that, but I just don't see that. For me, the legislation is very clear. It says specifically, for instance, that the medical marijuana facility will have a first dibs shot at sales. We know
Right.
that they can do that side by side. We know because of the Consumption Act, or component of it, that because it's done where places can sell it, that they will be able to do consumption there as well as with places that grow. I mean, there's a lot we actually do know already.
Yeah.
And there's no real reason for us not to think about the community, the character of the community, and isolate those components now, because that's not something that's going to come down from the state. In terms of where we think our zoning works for this sort of thing and how we feel about it, that's something I think we should have been getting busy with this months ago.
Yeah.
Okay.
Would it be better to keep it combined, combine it with medical marijuana?
Well, I mean, I think that's a pretty big question that I don't know that we're going to be able to resolve tonight, but I'd certainly like to hear
No,
what
but
other people think.
I'm just saying that we already have a medical marijuana facility. And it's almost like.
Are you talking about the zoning
Yeah.
concept that we're talking about, or are you talking specifically about that medical marijuana facility having recreational on site?
Right, but could there be one or two other medical marijuana sites that will sell recreational and medical, and that way we have them both combined, and we just keep them together, rather than separating medical on this side and recreational over here, and we're gonna
Well, I
have
don't think we can
3
require
different
that
stores.
a recreational place also meet the medical requirements. I mean, I don't think that's.
Well, no, I'm just
contemplated by
saying
the
that
statute.
medical seems to, I mean, they're already going to apply, anyways, to sell.
I would suggest that we use this opportunity to get more feedback from the people that are here and see what people are.
Yeah,
So
we
can I just
probably should.
jump in for a second? I have 2 questions. So the scope of tonight's meeting is to review the statement of purpose and kind of get a little further with the statement of purpose, and to hear from the public on what they'd like to see. So we're going to open it up to the public to hear from them. Are we also going to discuss, are you proposing we also discuss whether we should leave it at, we should incorporate it into 10.9 or make it a 10.10? Is that also on our agenda tonight?
The discussion is just about cannabis.
statement.
Purpose and
The
statement.
Well, not
purpose.
just about purpose statement, it's about, I mean, it's
Yeah.
for the agenda, it's a discussion of board discussion on purpose statement for new zoning ordinance for recreational marijuana. So I guess it is purpose statement.
Okay.
I hate that.
Well, but I mean, I think the purpose statement encompasses all the feedback that we want to get from people
Yeah.
about where they.
I'd like to see us
individual-
go forward at the end of it and say what's next.
Oh, of course. We're going to make actions and next steps. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
That's what
We have a member here who only has a limited time to speak. I wonder if we might be able to bend our
Sure.
rules a little bit and give them some time.
Sure.
Thank you. I have a public safety meeting downstairs right now, so I just wanted to give some input because I feel like this is an important issue. Salem Derby, 15 Westview Terrace, Precinct 4 City Councilor for the last 12 years. So I just want to say, I have a feeling people are going to come up here tonight and say, don't do this because you're going to keep East Hampton from being family friendly. And I want to nip that in the bud. Because that's insulting to 63% of East Hampton that voted for this. I don't think 63% of the population voted for something that was anti-family. And in fact, I would question why that phrase would ever be said in relation to cannabis. Is it when we look at alcohol, we look at tobacco, which are readily available within 400 feet of this spot right here. Are they that much more benign than cannabis? And in fact, I would challenge anybody to tell me how cannabis is more dangerous than alcohol. For example, how much would you have to consume to overdose? Alcohol compared to cannabis. Addiction. If you become addicted to cannabis, which you can, and you stop using, what are the side effects? Is it severe withdrawal, like it would be from alcohol? Potentially death, like it would be from alcohol? Would it be severe withdrawal like it would be from nicotine? I think that's an important question that needs to be asked. And so, that being said, I think that as this bill was passed, it was a bill to regulate cannabis like alcohol. So I think that what we should do is say, weigh these things equally, and not, and the reason I say equally is because the only thing that is weighing cannabis down is the stigma that exists from misinformation, from racist rhetoric, from racist policies that were instituted by this government, and I think that's something that needs to be understood and weighed in addition to this issue, because it doesn't stand alone. It comes with baggage, and that baggage is important to unload, because if you don't, then you can just say it's not family friendly. And what does that mean? It means the people that use it aren't family friendly. That's slippery slope. And does that mean if you use alcohol, you're not family friendly? Does that mean if you use tobacco, you're not family friendly? Does that mean someone who fills a prescription at Rite Aid and gets opioids is not family friendly? And these are important things. And I would say, I think Chet said something that was important, that there are places that have done this. And so that's an important thing. We can look and see what the results have been. As far as teen use, as far as addiction rates, as far as driving under the influence and accidents rate. These are all things that can be empirically studied. And so I would say that's something that we should do. And then take that information and craft something that is forward-looking, not regressive. So I have to go on meeting. I'm going to come back.
I have a question for you. Can you please provide links? This is the second time you've talked about racism. I don't know the connection there.
Google it. But I could send it to you for sure.
Could you please
But
send
if you
send
literally
to the
just
planning
Google
board?
race, there's
Oh,
just
yeah,
too
you
much
can Google
to.
that.
I mean, I could list off the top of my head.
Yeah, I just don't know what.
Anslinger, yeah.
Anslinger, and then
Anslingers?
the reason the Stamp Tax Act originally was passed because Mexican migrants coming over the border, working in Texas, and the residents were unhappy with them, and one of the things that they had brought with them were cannabis cigarettes.
Okay.
So, but if you Google it, you'll find it. I can get it to you for sure. Thank you for your time. I appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Salem.
Fascinating read.
Yeah, you can.
All right, is there-
I'd just like to take a minute, if you haven't yet signed in on the sign-in sheet, it's over on the
It's on the table over
table
there. If
over
you could
there.
just make sure you do that.
Please
that'd be
do
great.
so. Thank you.
All right, is there anyone else who'd like to come up? Oh, okay.
Hi, I'm Chuck McCullough, 42 Ashley Circle. I'm also work at Williston, Northampton. And I think in the past year or so, I think we forwarded a letter off to the planning board as well as the city council about our, I guess our representative, we're representing to everybody involved is just a certain amount of balance that we want to see as we go forward with our discussions about this. That we're very thoughtful about, all the, some of the elements that some of the people in the room will say are positives about this, is from a business standpoint. But also, I think we also want to exercise some balance about proximity to the schools, particularly Williston and also the high school, that places where recreational marijuana might be sold. We want to be a little thoughtful about that. And we also want to be thoughtful, I think, about, where East Hampton has gone in the last 20 years or so in terms of its development as a beautiful downtown. Not saying that any of these stores and proprietors will do anything to diminish that, but I think we have to exercise a certain amount of balance and cautiousness as we think about the possibility that some of these storefronts will be in places that we are going to be having young high school students and younger students walking by day in and day out. We have to be a little thoughtful about that. And that's our word of caution that we offer. And I know that we've spoken with the school, Nancy Follensby, for instance. We've worked very closely with her too. And our feelings are pretty much the same in that regard. So we just want to make sure that there's some balance and some cautiousness and some mindfulness to, as we proceed with licensing or any of the things that we're going to talk about, that we don't end up with a situation where this is a recreational marijuana destination. Certainly we want to make sure that it is we're exercising some good balance. And that's our only word of caution, I guess. Thank you.
A quick question. So in the medical marijuana regulations, there's a restriction, and in the bylaws for sort of proximity to schools, and it's actually a pretty broad definition of what an educational institution is. I assume that the state regs are going to do the same thing as what, if you've given any thought to what, I mean, you mentioned proximity and close proximity, but have you given any thought to sort of what a comfortable distance would be from your perspective?
Well, don't you think, I think from a, let's be practical about it, there's some people who own facility, and they own property in the center of town that they may consider to be an opportunity to do something like that. And so the proximity in East Hampton is different than, say, if a high school or a school like Williston were on the outskirts of town. So I think I'm interested in hearing the discussion take place and hear how it's going to go with the specific considerations that need to be thought through here in East Hampton. Whether we like it or not, Williston's right in the center of town. So is the high school, is fairly close as well. So, with that is special, unique circumstances that are particular to East Hampton. So again, no one's going to have the pat answer right now, even given the regulations.
Right.
So, but I think the word reasonableness, cautiousness, I think we just have to be a little thoughtful about as we proceed with what is this going to look like, and how is it really going to look and feel, not only for us as a community, but also what we're going to be displaying to high school students and younger students as well.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks. Oh,
Yeah,
do you have another
please.
question? Sorry, Jim.
What's the age range of the students at Williston?
We have a middle school, so the kids are going to be from 13 or so, and up through seniors and a few postgraduates who will be 19, something like that. So, all right.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will be back. I have to go down to the
Okay.
historical commission.
Sounds good.
Got a lot of that tonight.
All right.
And just so everyone knows, just state your name and your address if you live in the city before you start speaking.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Karima Risk. I'm a resident of East Hampton. I live at 38 Everett Street. I'm actually really happy to follow the gentleman before because I'm also a parent, and this is a concern of mine, but I'm on the other side of the coin. So I'm speaking to you as a resident, as a taxpayer, a voter, a volunteer, and a mother of a child. And I intend to become one of the first cannabis coffee owners in Massachusetts. I'm also a small female minority, someone who would be participating on this ground up level. So I'm here to urge the board to make progress on the recreational zoning regulations and to approve responsible businesses. Speaking to the point of the earlier speaker, I too want to see very responsible businesses as outlined in the HB 3818, outlining the recreationals. For example, privacy, shades. I also brought with me just one example. We were talking about examples before. The city of Portland has cannabis cafes. The most famous one, unfortunately, ran into problems with the Clean Air Act, and I hope to get around that with having an outdoor porch. But this is one document I'd like to respectfully submit to the council as just an example of a document that can help weed out responsible business owners to anticipate how would you address these issues, these social problems, and I think it's extremely important to hear everybody in the community, on both sides of the issue. Also, everything's in flux, of course, but I am very much in favor for on-site consumption. I would throw my hat as both a resident and a business owner if you needed any public feedback in terms of petitioning and that sort of thing. I would strongly urge for the on-site consumption aspect. I think there's an element of social good of taking people off of the streets and providing a location where they can safely consume rather than having public consumptions. I know in markets such as Spain, Oregon, and Colorado, these have become issues. So actually taking people off of the streets and giving them an alternative besides their home, where frankly many people do still face stigmas in their house. I can say that because I come from one. I'm the black sheep of my family. Nobody uses. I also come with 1 year of medical marijuana retail state experience in this business. So this is a passion of mine, and I would love to see it succeed and to succeed hand in hand with the municipality and with the community. There's a huge economic boom coming our way from recreational marijuana. Last year, North America spent $1.6 billion on legal cannabis, with an annual growth rate of about 25%. From many different sources you can read, they're predicting growth in the 20% range year over year, which is almost unheard of in any other industry. comparable to the dot-com boom, so a large piece of economic pie coming to Massachusetts. The Boston Globe predicts the legal marijuana market will be as big as $1.1 billion in Massachusetts by 2020. And I would argue that East Hampton is positioned to be economically benefit from this new industry. And in contrast, actually, with the earlier speaker, I believe that Western Mass is positioned to be an emerald corridor of sorts. What do I mean by that? That's really a region where businesses in the cannabis industry can flourish, but again, responsibly, safely, and in a regulated manner. Already cities such as Greenfield, Northampton, East Hampton, Holyoke, all along 91 have dispensaries that have already gone through the Department of Health process and are somewhere where they're heading towards provisional licensing. So it is a reality. The medical dispensaries are here. They will be very soon applying for recreational licensing, and small businesses and business owners such as myself want to come out of the woodwork and be part of that legal economic pie. Also, in addition, East Hampton, benefits from the rich agricultural roots that have produced local marijuana growers. We also have public support. It was alluded before, but I think you will likewise, if we have to come to petition or other such measures, find support is there. And also a community-minded ethos that permeates the region. So I would argue the political will and social opinions of the majority exist to collaboratively position East Hampton to have a favorable position in this economic pie. In fact, I'm going to go on and explain a little bit more about my business concept, but a key component is that I would love to be a test case for East Hampton. I would love to be a great opportunity and example for us to come together and get this right, instead of worrying about rushing, worrying about following someone else. I'm later going to make an argument about the harm that comes from waiting. So as I mentioned before, I'm seeking to open up one of the first legal cannabis coffee houses in Massachusetts. There's very few of these, by the way, in the United States. This would not be an Amsterdam type of coffee house, at least until technology allows us to get around the Clean Air Law Acts, which don't allow for smoking indoors. It would be a social, stigma-free place where adults may socialize and use marijuana products, with coffee, beverages, and food sourced as much as possible from Western Massachusetts, with a preference for East Hampton businesses. For example, I'd love to serve pastries from Small Oven Bakery, and sandwiches from Corsello Buscaria, and salads made from Mountain View Farms. So really a heavy emphasis on the local municipal development as well. Kind of, I see it as a circle of feeding back in economic development. Smoking will occur on to ensure compliance with the Clean Air Act and to protect employees from any smoke inhalation. My coffee shop will bring jobs and tax revenue, as well as other people coming to see out of curiosity what is going on in East Hampton. Those people, by the way, will also eat and need a gas up, so there will be businesses. My business will complement the new Hand and Cares dispensary that's already has provisional licensure. I'm not a direct competitor to them. In fact, I can provide a space for their patients to use marijuana as well. I'm not specifically a medical or recreational facility. I would define myself as a space with the proper permitting, and people can choose in which way they're going to use the cannabis product. Finally, I bring elements of social justice and education to my business venture. For example, something that's passionate to me and I've seen over my year working with medical marijuana patients or the veteran community, they really have a need to come together. There's a strong correlation also with the PTSD, and we find that they have a very high success with using marijuana. And I think those three elements combined could be a great potential for a community group to form. Similarly, others, whether it's mental health, even parents. By the way, soccer moms are becoming the fastest recreational marijuana users across the state. It's a fact, look it up. Especially in those retail markets. So again, it doesn't make you a bad parent. I would like to present a face of a responsible business owner. I'm not Cheech and Chong. I want to work with the community. In conclusion, I'd like to work hand in hand, as I said, with the municipality and other community leaders to get this right. If instead of a wait and see and follow in step approach, such as waiting until the CCC, the Cannabis Control Commission, releases all of its regulations, I challenge the East Hampton Planning Board to take advantage of such economic development opportunities and thoughtfully exercise its rights to responsibly zone recreational marijuana businesses. please remember, business planning, especially marijuana business planning, where we have additional layers of bureaucracy and regulation and beyond what other businesses face, take months and years of planning. And the emerging recreational business community is looking now for places where they may find zoned areas in which to place their businesses. Your willingness to establish such zoning regulations will only result in the current business diversion for you, attract new ones, and really create a responsible, positive business climate. I thank you for your time. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Sure.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. My name is Dick Evans. I'm not an East Hamptoner. I'm a resident of Northampton. I'm a lawyer. I was chair of the Yes on 4 campaign, and I was involved in the writing of the Question 4 statute, and have been following developments very closely. The couple of points I'd like to make. One is that the new law contemplates the issuance of 4 or 5 different types of licenses: a cultivation license, a product manufacturer license, a retail license, a something called a craft cooperative license, which is something new. We didn't expect that to come out in the new law, and it appears to be governed mostly by rules from the Department of Agriculture, oddly enough. And then there's the medical marijuana license, which is the process, the system that we already have now. There's also a catch-all. The CCC is authorized to issue other marijuana-related licenses. We haven't a clue what those are going to look like. They may be special events or what. Another point I'd like to make is that as James read the language from the new law that says that with the collection of sufficient signatures, a private citizen can put something on the town ballot to authorize on-site consumption facilities like cannabis cafes, as Karima described. The statute does not say that that's the only way to do it. The way that the licensing system is going to work in very simple terms is that applicants will send probably a very fat application to the CCC, and the new law says that they're supposed to start accepting applications, I think, in April. This is very ambitious, extremely ambitious. I mean, if they have the regulations out by March 15th and start accepting applications in April, they're going to be flooded. But so you submit an application to the CCC. Then the CCC sends the application to the city or town where you want to operate. And then 90 days go by, during which the CCC studies your application and waits to see if there's any objection from the town. If there's no objection from the town, then your application is granted, assuming it's in proper form. And so I think there's going to be a rush over the next 6 months to get local ordinances passed, because the CCC won't grant a license if they hear from the town that the proposal violates local law. Now, I don't see anything in the law preventing your ordinance from including a provision about on-site consumption, cannabis cafes. Now, it says that citizens may force a referendum in such a law, but if the committee is agreeable to having cannabis cafes, I don't see any language in there now that you can't provide for it. So what is your agenda here? Well, it seems to me fairly simple, and that is you can anticipate that there will be those licenses which I just identified. So the question for you then is, what rules do we need here in East Hampton to protect the public health and safety with regard to cultivation, to protect the public health and safety with regard to product manufacturer operations, And what rules do we need to protect the public health and safety from retail? I think those are the issues that I would suggest this board address yourself to. And hopefully you will have your ordinance written by February or so. And when the applications will go in, and there will be something to compare them to. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to, yeah, James?
There was a comment, you brought up that they're releasing more rules. March 15th, I think is when you said. But you're stating clearly that that's too late.
Well, I'm saying you shouldn't wait until March 15th to do your homework. No, you can go ahead and write your ordinance. I don't think there'll be too much in the CC rules that govern directly or that bear directly on local ordinances.
What would you suspect might be? Signage?
Oh, it's about security, and it's about for the applicants and all manner of things, like the medical marijuana laws. Very similar to that. But don't wait until spring. I'd strongly suggest you get going now and think about what are the risks to public health and safety that licensed marijuana operations pose? Well, I think they're darn few, but that's your call. And then write the rules to protect the community from those risks. That's how I suggest you proceed.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Come on up.
Hi, I'm Marty Klein. I live at 7 Stone Path Lane. I've lived in East Hampton since 1999. I do a variety of things in the community, but related to what we're discussing tonight, back in February, I guess I was the first person in Massachusetts to give public presentations, talks about growing marijuana under the new law. So I had a few things I wanted to say. One is that this was a law that was passed by adults, for adults, and I'm questioning some of the opinions I hear about harm to youth. I've spoken to people who grew up in this town as far back as the 70s, and kids were growing weed then, they're growing it today. It was available then, just as it was available. It's no more available after it became legal. It was probably always available here. So this isn't something new, like this demon appeared once we legalized it. It's been like this for a long time, only now we have a law that regulates it. I'm really in favor of any zoning laws that we create that be parallel to our alcohol laws, because that's kind of what we voted on, to treat it like alcohol. And so if we allow package stores on Main Street, we should allow establishments that also are able to have retail sale of cannabis, marijuana. One thing I'm a little concerned about is having establishments where patrons can consume alcohol and marijuana. I think the combination is potentially can get people into trouble. So one or the other, but I don't necessarily want to see both at the same place. I came across an article this week. I was just doing a little research in advance of this meeting, and if you'd allow me to read about, this is about the impacts in Colorado based on the biggest study, as far as I know, that's been done in the US on impacts on adolescents and marijuana, done in the state that's had it legal for the longest amount of time. So I'll put my glasses on here if you'll bear with me. Rates of marijuana use among Colorado teenagers are essentially unchanged in the years since the state's voters legalized in 2012. New survey data from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment shows. The latest data from Colorado includes 2015, reflecting 2 full years of the legal marijuana market's effect. These numbers give the strongest indication yet that the fears of skyrocketing adolescent use have not materialized. These statistics clearly debunk the theory that making marijuana legal for adults will result in more teen use. Mason, Director of Communications for the Marijuana Policy Project, said in a statement, "Levels of teen use in Colorado have not increased since it ended marijuana prohibition, and they are lower than the national average. Elected officials and voters in states that are considering similar proposals should be wary of claims that it will hurt teens." This latest survey polled a much larger sample of Colorado students, 17,000, than the federal survey, which polls fewer than 400 Colorado teenagers in a given year. That much larger sample could produce a more accurate estimate than the smaller numbers in the federal drug survey. There's a simple reason why legalization may not be having much of an effect on teen marijuana use. Adolescents already report that marijuana is widely available. It's too bad that we can't regulate good parenting, because that's probably, got more to do with kids getting in problems with drugs than seeing a shop on Main Street with a cannabis leaf on the sign. I'm just not real clear on what the harm of, and if there's any data on, well, if 100 teenagers pass a shop that sells marijuana, there's going to be 50 of them that are going to turn into raging drug addicts. I'd like to see those statistics. I don't think they exist. So I just question that. And let me see if there's anything else that I need to bore you with here. Yeah, I think given the licensing requirements by the state, just as it's been with medical marijuana, that this is not going to be like, anybody can just open up a shop and it's going to be the Wild West when it comes to marijuana. It's going to be tightly regulated, as it should be. I mean, in my heart of hearts, I think it should be less tightly regulated than alcohol because it's a lot less harmful than alcohol. But I also think that we, as a society, are going to take a few years to get over our reefer madness hangover, and eventually people will realize that this is an extremely benign substance and very helpful to a lot of people in different ways. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else would like to comment? Go on.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Ruth Ever. I'm the coalition coordinator for the East Hampton Healthy Youth Coalition. I just wanted to say a couple of things. And I want to just, I guess, preface it by saying that I think sometimes people think that our coalition is anti-everything or is all about, there was some misperceptions about what the mission of the coalition is, and it's not to shut down businesses in town. It's not to stop adults from doing things that have been legally passed or voted on. So I just kind of want to make that clear. We've actually met with both of the marijuana-related businesses in town and had really productive, friendly meetings, thought about ways we can collaborate together, because they're going to be reaching a lot of parents who are going to be using marijuana, and it's an opportunity for us to give some education about safe storage and things like that. And every business we've talked to has people like Karima. I have never talked to her, but I can hear that she's someone who is not interested in just, it's not a massive tobacco industry that needs to get their addicts as young children and get them hooked and sort of, target that way. So I just want to make sure that that's clear when I make my remarks. I guess what I would say is my main concern is that when you're thinking about zoning, that you think about it from the youth perspective, which people have been sort of saying, what are the youth seeing in town? What does it look like to them? And what I want to say about what I just heard, well, there's a couple of things about what I just heard that concerns me. One is that the problem with some of the Colorado data, and I didn't come prepared with a lot of articles and research, but I can certainly send those things along. Data is sort of where you get it and what you make of it. And the thing to keep in mind about Colorado is that that's a voluntary survey. So as far as I understand, neither Boulder nor Denver participate in that survey. So you're missing out on the two biggest towns that have the most, marijuana dispensaries and pot shops and stuff. So it's not that that what the gentleman said is invalid. It's just that you've got to make sure you're getting all of the information so that you get good information, because I've been to a lot of conferences where people from Colorado are talking about a lot of problems in their communities. And the advantage we have of passing marijuana later is that we can really learn from other states and do things a lot more responsibly and consciously. And I'm confident that in East Hampton and this community that we are completely capable of that, and that, you know, I'm not worried that people are just like, let's put it everywhere and who cares. You know, this is a community that clearly cares about its youth and its families and wants us to be a successful, you know, community in every sense and not lose that family-friendly status that it's so well known for. So you know, you've got to balance that out with when we make decisions, how is it going to look to our young people? The one thing that I can tell you, and there is plenty of data on this, is that as perception of harm goes down, use of a drug goes up. And there's a lot of data on this. And we are just getting our data back now that we did in March for the entire community, 8th, 10th, and 12th grade. Unfortunately, I can't present it to you yet because I literally got it like 2 days ago, but you know, I'd be happy to, once we've kind of gone through it and looked at it, you know, to know, like, well, what's happening in our community. Quick glances show that definitely perception of harm around marijuana is going down. What that means is that when you legalize a drug, you run the risk of the perception of harm going down and therefore use going up. And it's true that marijuana has been around for a long time, and it's not like this is some new drug that kids have never heard of. But when it becomes legal, it sends a message to our young people that this is something that we think is sanctioned. And therefore we run a risk of young people being more inclined to use it. Or to get the sense of, well, it can't be bad for you because everybody's saying that it's legal. And a lot of young people perceive that it's now legal for them. A lot of people perceive that they can now smoke in the streets. There's a lot of misunderstanding and misperceptions, and that's not necessarily the job of the zoning board to figure out. You know, you can't zone those kind of things necessarily, but again, I would just urge you to think about when we make decisions, what is the message we're sending, what's the perception we're putting out there. If there is not that you're going to do this, but if there was a pot shop on every corner, I mean, there's a lot of data on having liquor stores on every corner in dense urban areas and what that does to the teen alcohol use rate. It clearly goes up. There's a lot of data on that. I don't see that happening here, but I'm just giving you by way of example. The only other concern I have about ingesting on site is just the challenge I think we have is that we don't have a way to test if someone is inebriated to the point of being dangerous on the road. So if you're using a substance in a cafe or somewhere in town and then you're getting in your car and going somewhere, we don't know at what point we are putting the community at risk of people driving drugged, driving high. We know that there's a lot of problems with that with alcohol. We do have a way to to test that and to market and to have regulations around that. So that's a challenge that every community is going to face, and I don't have an answer for that, but it's something that I think we have to think about as a community. So that's all I have right now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
Same question I asked for Mr. McCullough from Williston earlier. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts about sort of the proximity to schools or areas of town, that kind of thing, more concrete concepts of what you would like to see if you were.
Well, I assume that there is already going to be some of that coming down from the state. There, just like there is for alcohol now, and tobacco, I think as well. I mean, it's not going to be within 600 feet of schools. I assume that's going to happen. You do have a challenge here in East Hampton. We have a lot of schools very close to town, and kids are walking right through town, and they're going to be seeing stuff. I think there is a way to not have a lot of advertising. That's something you probably can control more. I don't know what they're going to be suggesting from the state, but because we have so many schools close by and kids go up and down the street, I would urge you to really think about what kind of advertising do we want to allow in the windows. I mean, it'd be great to have that with alcohol as well. There's a lot of regulations that sort of didn't get into place with alcohol, and hopefully we can do it a little more consciously with a new drug now that's becoming legal for the first time, in a century. So I think I don't have a set, you have to do it this way. I mean, you have to put it in the context of you know, what works in this community, like other people have been saying. But that, so I would say that that would be something to think about, is there something around advertising that we can do to keep it pretty low-key, not in the windows, it has to be inside the store, things that I think the Hattie's shop has already been thoughtful about proactively from what I've seen. Yeah, I'm not sure there's anything else.
I don't mean to put you on the spot. I'm
Yeah,
just curious.
no,
when
it's, and
we
I
hear
can,
that.
I mean, will there be an opportunity to submit written?
There will be. There's also going to be more hearings.
Okay.
There's going to be plenty of opportunities if you want to bring stuff.
I
next
have
time.
one thing, as far as a person being high, each person is different. I don't know if you smoke it
Right.
as versus he smokes it.
Right.
Which one of you sitting there and he looks like he's dazed, but you're not.
Right, well, that's the challenge we have with alcohol too. I mean, it's, you know, and we've
who-
managed as a
and
country
how-
to come up with
how-
regulations that we feel like reflect
Are-
accurately enough when it feels like it's unsafe for someone to get behind the steering wheel.
And it also depends on how they're cultivated.
Right, I mean, this is the thing with
There are
with
certain
marijuana, you've got
ways you
THC
can
that's-
cultivate it one
Yeah.
way or another.
Right.
There's,
There's a lot of challenges with this drug. You know, alcohol is
You know, the
regulated
health
where you know
department
exactly
has to
what
get
percent of
in.
alcohol is in that vodka or in that beer.
Right.
And hopefully that will happen with marijuana, but there's a huge range of how much of the, you know, the drug that can really give you that high is going to be in it.
the realization is there's a lot that goes into that, and
But do we think that the regulations are going to be stricter than alcohol and cigarette regulations?
I don't think so, but the
More strict?
awareness should be there, but not being stricter.
Well, I know with the advertising, I think the language in the statute says we can regulate advertising, but no more strictly than we regulate advertising for alcohol.
Right.
Just alcohol, I think, which
Yeah.
also, we've been in the process of redoing our sign ordinance, which is difficult, and also I'm not entirely sure how we can do anything they've said in light of some of the Supreme Court stuff that's come down, so that's a second question, but,
Yeah, because I'm just thinking of the Maple Street School, and right next, like literally a stone's throw away is that little shop that has giant cigarette signs
Yep.
in the windows.
Right.
And I mean, so I mean, I feel like we can't legislate marijuana stricter than we do cigarettes
Right.
or alcohol. I think it's
so
not.
maybe, as the last speaker said, that's an opportunity to open up the door on how we would regulate signage for those other products, or
Yeah.
maybe it's
Right.
not, but I mean, I think
Which
you're
I
right.
think would be
but-
great, and they're actually, you know, I don't know that I don't know that we have regulations here around what percent of your windows you can have covered with tobacco advertising.
Right.
Do we have regulations?
Be
for that?
common sense too.
Redoing it.
We do
The old
have
one.
regulations just generally for how much of a window can be covered
Yeah.
in displays for,
For safety reasons.
presumably.
Yeah. I mean, because it is an opportunity to say these are, I mean, tobacco is the #1 killer of any drug. I
Right.
mean, it's 400,000 people are still dying a year. I'm not naive about any of this, and we've had many years to really do a lot of education and public health education for young people around tobacco, so they kind of get, even though they're up against a lot of advertising that makes it look real sexy, they kind of get that it's not good for you,
I also read that cigarette tobacco is more dangerous than if you wanted to smoke marijuana because of the carcinogens and that are in cigarette tobacco.
Yeah.
You won't find it in
In
marijuana or cannabis.
No, in fact, recent studies show that if you smoke cannabis while smoking cigarettes, your chances of getting cancer are reduced by 23%.
Right.
Because you're smoking less cigarettes?
Because of the anti-cancer
maybe.
properties, the apoptosis and angiogenesis properties. Of course, the National Institute on Cancer just modified their directives showing that, in fact, cannabis does reduce cancer in laboratory studies. There's more studies coming out right now.
Where'd you
But its
find that?
cancer-causing propities are no
Did
longer
you-
met.
Just leave you with one
Did you
last thought,
Google?
if I could.
Did you Google that,
Resolving
Jim?
properties.
Which is just, again, from the
Google?
youth perspective, that the teen brain is not the same as the adult brain. And that's really the main message that our coalition spends our time educating and thinking about, which is that basically addiction is a pediatric disease. And when young people are using drugs, at younger ages, so before 25 really, but certainly before 18 or 21, they are much higher risk of becoming addicted or becoming lifelong smokers or whatever it is to that drug. And so really our main concern here is just what are the things that we can do as a community to make sure that young people are not getting it? Because if you start using any of these drugs over the age of 21 or 25, your chances of becoming addicted are so much less. And that's really ultimately what we're talking about here. Is there's lots of people who can responsibly use alcohol, can responsibly use marijuana.
I agree.
Cigarettes, it's a little hard. There's sort of no good use of cigarettes, of tobacco per se. But our concern is just how do we prevent addiction? How do we prevent dependence? And that sort of lifelong, where you sort of lose control of your life because you're dependent on that drug. So that's where we're coming from. And so what can we do to make sure that our 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds are not getting access?
So that raises the question. So if we did not restrict sale or consumption in downtown, close to schools, if we said that was acceptable, would it be more palatable then to say that a certain age limit, say 21 and under, could not even enter the store?
Yeah, I think that would be great. I mean, if it's like going into a bar. I mean, you're not going to have 15-year-olds going into bars just to hang out or something.
Right.
So they should
I mean,
be
you have to be a certain age to buy
tobacco.
tobacco.
The e-cigarette
same
stores
thing
in
with
town
alcohol.
don't have kids. They check IDs when you come
Right.
in the door, and that's a great way to help regulate.
Exactly.
It's not going to stop them from getting access outside of there, but that's certainly a step that you
Right.
can take.
And really, that's beyond our jurisdiction to figure out how they get their marijuana. If we say these are the regulations, if someone goes in as a 25-year-old and buys the pot and gives it to the kid, that's
Right. And
really
it's the same
beyond
with
what we can
alcohol
do.
now when kids stand out
Well,
in the
that's
parking
what they
lot and
do
say,
now.
hey, will you buy me a six-pack?
Right.
I mean, that's where we as a community have to say, no, I'm not
Had to be
gonna do
responsible
that.
as a community.
Of
Right.
course, you can't zone all that. You can't policy your
Okay.
way out of all of this. It's a whole community effort, but
Right.
there's a part that you can do.
Okay. Thank
I'd
you.
like to make one comment, and I'm sure that we have a lot more people, but the question has come up again and again about distance.
Yep.
In our section 10.93C1 of our medical marijuana zoning currently says no RMD or OMMD, and you can give explanations of those for those who don't know if you look in the zoning, shall be located within 200 feet of any building or housing containing elementary, middle, preparatory, vocational, or high school. So we have already debated, already worked on for our medical marijuana, gone through the community, vetted, and in our zoning, 200 feet. I don't see any reason why we should bring that up again.
Be debating this more.
Yeah, it's there.
Well, the statute has, I think it has 500 feet, but I think we can change that. So
Right.
we have
Well,
to
we did, we changed it too, didn't we?
in the medical, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the benefits of not creating a 10.10 and going with a 10.93. We can just make little changes. Just the things that we need to for safety, just
Understood.
for recreational.
Understood.
Yeah.
Thank you. And
Okay.
I don't know, is it okay to speak again? Or
Sure.
Sure.
I know that you had a response to her question. Do you still want to respond to her question?
more-
We gotta wait
If you-
though to go up, but I just wanted to make sure you're next, or you can, if you were responding to her, she
No,
wants to.
I just wanted to thank actually Ruth, because I think that's a her presentation makes a lot of sense. I think that nobody in this room, I know I have 3 kids that go to school in East Hampton, and I don't think anybody here wants our kids to be using any substances. I would say right now, maybe Ruth can back me up, at least the last YRBS, the Youth Risk Behavior Survey that I saw, alcohol was the #1 drug of choice for adolescents. And so that, Ruth nodded her head, that's true. And I would say marijuana's, or cannabis, it's probably coming in second, maybe third. Cigarettes are on the decline, it's
I
great.
think cigarettes are
I do
second.
want to just, put this out here. The teen brain is an important thing that we need to understand and bring into this discussion. As a teacher of adolescents, that's something, as a health teacher, that I talk about on a daily basis. And the health of our adolescents' brain is critical. Delaying first use is critical. And it doesn't matter what the substance is.
Right.
Delaying first use alcohol, delaying first use opioids, delaying first use cigarettes, cannabis, anything you can use, sugar, sex, anything that causes a dopamine response. That is what we're talking about. We're talking about GABA, dopamine, serotonin, the chemicals of the brain. Okay? Now, I'm going to put something out there that goes a little one step further. One thing that is, and I bet Ruth will back me up on this one, one thing that is equally as associated with abuse of substances is childhood trauma. That is something that we as a community can do something about. So, one of the things that I don't know if you guys have talked about is local option tax. You know, as a city councilor, one of the things that I'm going to see if we can do to put forward is to say we need to use that local option tax and use whatever revenue we get for that to put towards education, to put towards public safety, to try to minimize and mitigate childhood trauma in East Hampton, which is going to give us kids that are more resilient. It's going to give us kids that can walk by 10 pot shops and say, no, thank you. Because it's not the pot shop. That's not the issue here. The issue is trying to escape reality and early first use of whatever substance. So I just want to thank Ruth for bringing that up. I think it was a really good point. Thanks.
Well said.
All right, we had a few other hands here. Yes, sir. Oh, you had a response before. Can we just let her?
Yeah.
Do you want to respond?
I just had a 2-second
Okay.
clarification.
Sorry, sir.
I apologize. And this is my
Okay,
first
I'm
time
counting it
Apologize,
down.
it's all good.
So, Ruth, it was awesome to hear you speak, actually, coming on two different ends of, I guess, the spectrum, because we have a lot of commonalities, and that makes me happy. But I was going to say, in terms of, for purpose of what's on the agenda right now, in terms of the zoning, we've heard the 200 feet in the regs, as James pointed out, and the medical marijuana regs for zoning. The cannabis law does mention 500 feet. And then if you wanted to go a step further in your considerations, I provide the example of the city of Portland. There's many other examples, but they have 1,000 feet. So, I mean, just to kind of give you guys a perspective as to maybe if you want to be on the conservative side, on the not conservative side. The other part, I just wanted, as just a point of factual clarification, there's a lot of prescriptive regulations in terms of marketing, branding, advertising, not allowing signatures and signs and those sorts of things in the shops. So I'd really encourage everybody to go ahead and read this bill that was just signed by the governor. Thanks. Sorry.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, sir. Come on down.
Very patient.
Thank you for hearing me, Council. My name is Sean Easton. I'm from New Bedford, Massachusetts. So before I get into a little bit about me, I just kind of wanted to touch base with a few things I heard here tonight, and maybe it helps that will help you guys. Chester had mentioned, and I hear a lot of people tossing around Colorado, Boulder, Michigan. This is East Hampton. What worked there may be a good guide for you guys to start, but I wouldn't be so dead set on looking at other towns. You kind of have to see how it's going to apply to this city. And that being said, I've been to Portland, Maine, Cambridge, Northampton, New Bedford, Mass, Fairhaven, Westport, and all hopes of finding something, which you'll get to find out what I'm trying to do. And as far as I've seen, East Hampton has the best fit, the best art community, the best youth programs, the closest farms. It just seems like the perfect fit. So that being said, I think you kind of have to look at what works for your town, and maybe look to Colorado as a guide, but don't just go blindly basing everything on that. See what's important here. It seems like a grassroots community, and I'd like to see it stay that way. That being said, there's a couple of disinformations that I heard. There is comparable testing for THC levels, just like alcohol. You can have a beer at 8.1%, you can have a cannabis at 21%. And everybody knows exactly what's going to be. And there's not going to be any regulations any different than the medical, that anything sold, you're going to know exactly what's in there 100%, down to the flavors, down to the CBDs, down to the psychoactive components. So just keep that in mind. It's not such a gray area. It's pretty much an exact science. And another thing I heard, that when people perception of drug use, it prevents more or encourages more harm. I think sometimes that's the case, but look at Portugal. They completely blindly legalized everything, and they have the best addiction rates in the world.
The lowest. Do you mean the lowest, or
the best as far?
I think it's the most ever.
I'm not very good at this whole public speaking thing, and I'm very nervous. So, no, the lowest addiction rates in the world. So,
yeah.
you know, that being said, there's also a roadside test for it. So, there is ways to, it should be treated just like alcohol. If I can do this, this, and this, and still get in the car, then if I have a brownie or something, I should be able to do the same thing. And I'd just like to state a couple facts. This has been going on since the dawn of time. I used cannabis as a youth and a young adult, and it's now that it's finally legal, it's just like there's not going to be a bunch more people using it. They already did. They just won't be in jail for it. You know, they won't be persecuted. So that being said, I'll keep the rest of it short. I'm a gourmet chef, trained my whole entire life. I've worked in many kitchens, and my dream is to open up a restaurant that can serve cannabis in the food as a flavor infusion, as well as pair it like beer or wine for on-site consumption. And it's not as carcinogenic as cigarettes and smoking. And if that's truly the case, there is special HVAC systems that you guys can think about, as well as vaping, which is non-combustible. So there's a whole lot of options for you guys to just, you know, give a hard no on the consumption. I would like to see a restaurant here. I foresee us having a restaurant here if would be permitted. And you guys are in the early stages of that. I've been dedicating my past 3 years to working with these flavors and testing and levels, and I've got it dialed in. So that's what we're hoping to do. And I say we because I have a partner and many people behind me. So that's basically it. You'll probably see a lot more of me, and thank you for your time.
Thanks.
Thank you.
very much.
All right, there was a hand all the way in the back. Did you have some? I don't want to keep grabbing people in front of you.
Really quick.
Right, and then this guy in the blue shirt that walked up
Thank you,
too.
Council, for the opportunity to speak. My name is Avery LaValle. I'm a 35-year resident of the town of East Hampton. Marijuana's been in East Hampton since before I have. It's been labeled a pot town since I was a little kid. It's not changing anytime soon. A couple of points I'd like to make are the parallels that have been drawn between alcohol, tobacco, and marijuana. You can't draw a parallel to those three items, and it's not because pot's the bigger monster. It's the lesser demon of the three. It's not gonna kill you. It's not gonna make you, you know, a slovenly slave to the drug. It's an herb. It's a plant that grows out of the ground with water and dirt. You know, there are people, for example, just a quick story, my grandmother's dying of pancreatic cancer. Her whole life she was afraid because she grew up in the 30s during the Depression where pot was labeled the devil's weed. And she never touched it. And she also never drove a car. But now she's dying of pancreatic cancer, and they're giving her a few months to live, and they're giving her these drugs that are messing her up pretty freaking bad. I went in there the other day, talked to her about marijuana usage. She said she refused to smoke it because of her childhood. I got her some edible gummy bears. She tried it, and I broke down in tears after 3 days because my grandmother called me and told me that if she would have known that this was this helpful, this late in her life, she might have had a little bit more time to spend with her family because she was able to use this plant, this herb, to take away her nausea, to allow her to sleep at night, to allow her to have enough energy to get up and want to eat and live a few more weeks with her family. I think that a field sobriety test, a standard field sobriety test, works in any way, shape, or form to decide if you're prepared to drive or not. I think that if you can't touch your nose or stand on one leg or recite a couple of facts and you're falling all over the place, you can't drive. I don't think you need a breathalyzer to decide whether or not somebody's too messed up to drive. East Hampton has been a family community and a farming community forever, since I can remember, since I was born in the early 80s. There are pot farmers all over this town. They're good people. They have families. They go to church. They are, all I can say is they're good people and they've been here since the beginning and they're going to continue to be here, and this just allows them to come out of their caves and be the good people that God knows they are, and now they can see their fellow man as a good person as well. Thank you guys for your time.
Thanks.
Thank you. Ready?
Powerful.
Hi, Lee Shore, 53 Holyoke Street, Unit 1, East Hampton, Massachusetts. I just wanted to ask a question about the zoning and the proximity to schools for pot shops and establishments that sell and serve alcohol. I wonder, as you know, someone is at Big E's and they want to go from getting a carton of milk to getting a bottle of orange juice, you walk by an aisle of alcohol, you know? I don't know where that falls in the regulations, but as someone who, you know, I'll have a beer, I'll smoke a joint. but I'm still really, really frustrated with the level of accessibility and just visual accessibility of some of these substances, because with 15 years in the mental health system, I've seen a lot of people in recovery who are struggling to stay sober. Sometimes just having something that close is triggering enough to make it that much harder to get through the day. And I would say, you know, if it was going to be regulated like alcohol, and I was going to walk from the milk to the orange juice and could also grab a six-pack and an ounce of weed, though convenient, I don't know that that's the best idea, you know. And I'm kind of speaking on behalf of a lot of people I know that have been, you know, really struggling with substance use. And also as someone who has benefited greatly from marijuana. I had a brain hemorrhage about 5 years ago. I was on heavy narcotics to try to help with the pain. I was losing weight every day. I was in agonizing pain, and physician suggested, you know, maybe try a puff of marijuana. And within a couple hours, I had eaten something and my headache cleared. And like Avery was saying earlier, the feeling of relief that I had, it made me cry for the people that suffer with chronic pain, that don't have access to something that I lived the benefit of. And I was just like, I can't believe it. So the connection between recovery, responsible use, and on-site consumption, it's really important. That's socializing. And if somebody is able to legally, medicinally use marijuana in a place that's comfortable and safe with their peers, to be able to get out of the house and feel comfortable and safe, I think that would be a wonderful thing to have in the city of East Hampton, and it would be a benefit to a lot of us. Having been in, you know, coffee shops in Amsterdam and buying marijuana at retail stores in Oregon and Colorado, it's like going into the Pentagon trying to get into those establishments, man. I mean, you're like ID, 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 yes, thank you, and then you're in. It's not like just strolling in or grabbing a 40 while you're going down the aisle at Big E's, you know? And one of the things I really appreciated about the coffee shops, and it was mentioned earlier about alcohol and marijuana being used in the same place. I loved that in Amsterdam that wasn't happening. There was nothing better than going in, buying a joint and a bottle of fruit juice and sitting down and quietly, peacefully enjoying myself in that environment. So I know that's a lot of things I kind of put out there, but I think that, you know, having this sort of sober conversation about getting high is really important. I'm really glad that everybody came to share. And so from the perspective of someone who does use but wants to see it done responsibly, as someone with many years in the mental health field, and as someone who has benefited greatly and been scared also of using marijuana, I think it's a lot to talk about, and I'm glad that so many people are here to listen. So thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Excellent
Thank
comments.
you.
Excellent.
Real sure.
First off, I wanted to say thank you for letting me speak. My name is Jacob Moriarty. I'm a resident of Holyoke, but lifelong. I grew up in Munson, Massachusetts. As a veteran of the United States Army, in my journey of life, I've come with a lot of trials and tribulations due to induced post-traumatic stress disorder due to combat. When I first had come home from deployment, after I had settled back home in Massachusetts after being discharged, I found myself having a lot of difficulty with life that I would have had beforehand. I didn't leave my house for about 3 months. I had social anxiety, whereas beforehand in high school I was winning prom king. Mm-hmm. I wasn't the Jake Moriarty that I knew, and I wasn't the Jake Moriarty that my family knew. It happened to be that one of my close family members came by my house because he couldn't get a hold of me on the phone. He had thought that I was committing suicide, and little did he know if he didn't stop by that day, I might have.
He came by and he had probably the biggest joint in the world that I've ever seen. And he was like, you and I, we're gonna smoke this together and we're gonna go to the mall. And now in my head, if anybody who has ever suffered from PTSD, going to the mall is probably mission impossible. And I was like, I don't know if we're gonna do this, but God willing, I did it. And that day, I bought myself a pair of Air Jordans in the mall. And I had a wonderful conversation with somebody who was in the local security force, which at the time was very awkward, but afterwards it made me feel very good that I had a conversation for once. With that being said, as a responsible adult, as a combat veteran, I know that plenty of responsible people like Karima and the councilman who have talked, the information is there, and I know that you guys will make the proper decision. When it comes to zoning, I feel anywhere from 1,000 to 200 feet is good, just to throw a number for you guys. But I think that it's important to keep the youth in mind as well. That was spoken upon, and then also giving a safe place for somebody like me who literally is a life-changing event to be able to go to somewhere safe and regulated where I don't want a kid with marijuana just as much as I wouldn't want a kid with a beer. But however, there needs to be a place where I could use medicine responsibly, or if those who aren't a patient, to be able to try it for the first time with people who are educated so they could get the proper relief that they're looking for. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you. Well, before we go to follow-ups, if there's anybody who hasn't spoken yet that wants to, okay.
Hi, David Cantler, 7 South Panther Street. Just a resident. I have no expertise here. A lot of really interesting information has been shared that I appreciate. I want to say marijuana is not consequence-free. I just read a CBS News article about ER incidents for teens is up about 4 times as much. Now, it's not that they only have marijuana in their systems. About half of them seem to have something else as well. So I think my point in bringing that up is just that it's not a consequence-free substance. I really would love to have an on-site shop here in East Hampton, but I also want to make sure that we have a way to do an accurate field sobriety test here in Massachusetts before we have on-site here in East Hampton. So I don't, if the timing of what's coming down about an accurate test works with the way the zoning board is working and the regulations you're putting up, I would love to have on-site here, again, if we can have an accurate test. And then I think the concerns that the schools have brought up about distance is really important, and the idea of use. The final thing I want to say is I really want to implore you, I didn't realize the alcohol signage regulations were so loose, and if this is a time to re-explore those, like, please get all of these substances at the same time in terms of how the advertising and signage works. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All order on that one.
Anything else? Okay. Follow up? Well,
Okay, go ahead, your follow-up,
Greg
and then Marty.
Oh, sorry, Greg, you want to go first?
Either one.
No, hold on, we got a new speaker here. One more second, sorry.
Oh,
brand new.
Greg Rowland, I live here in East Hampton, 23 Summer Street. I'm a parent, and I've been here for close to 15 years. I guess one of the things that we have to decide as a community is whether, what the business model is here. I mean, this is a zoning board. I've heard some great, my father died of pancreatic cancer. I feel for some of the stories that I've heard here, but the medical use is not really on the table. The recreational use is not really on the table. Recreational marijuana is here. It is legal. It is accessible. It will be accessible whether or not East Hampton creates a lot of retail facilities or not. And I think so. It's really a question of zoning and what constitutes what we want for our community as far as the business model. I think there's problematic issues when you put profit motive in with drugs or alcohol. I'm a CPA, I'm a business person. The motivation is to sell more. and to create an audience for sales. And if there are new and upcoming demographics for your audience, then there will be unscrupulous profit motive generating targeting of those demographics. So I have concern about that for sort of broader concerns with teenagers and youth. Having a sense of THC being safe, because the perception is that it is safe, and I think for most adults, moderate use is safe. But it's really hard to kind of communicate that to young people. And I actually think that responsible adults and responsible kids, that communication can happen. But I also sit on the board of an anti-poverty nonprofit, and the usage rates for regular use of marijuana, it's not alcohol. They very closely track with tobacco. So, people who are lower income and who have not graduated from high school, the usage rate for tobacco, for smoking regularly cigarettes, is 20%. For alcohol, it's 8%. For marijuana, regular use, it's 19%. For people who have not graduated from high school and who are living at the poverty line and vulnerable in our community, the usage rates indicate that this is a lot more like cigarettes and tobacco than it is alcohol. It is just not equivalent to alcohol when it comes to using that as a model. I think alcohol is flawed, personally. I mean, I don't think we think we have a lot of problems with alcoholism, but I just wanted to lay that out there, that alcohol and marijuana are not by any stretch identical, and our approach to it, I don't think, should be identical.
Right.
So that's just one thing, and I actually don't think that this marijuana is anywhere like today with commercialization is going to be anything like what we've seen in the 1970s or in the 1980s or in the 1990s or whatever. The concentrations are much stronger. We're talking about flavors. We're talking about food infusion. This is not stuff that is out of my youth or most of the youth, the people that are in this room. I think we need to be concerned about the concentration levels for our young people. And honestly for us too. So I don't know what's in the law. I haven't actually read the recent Beacon Hill version to see if there's any restrictions on concentrations, any restrictions on what THC can be put in. But the reality is, my kids, a lot of other people's kids in this room, their first experience with marijuana is not going to be similar to the first experience of grown adults in this room. It's not going to be smoked. It's going to be edible. It's going to be shared. It's going to be in the hallway. It's going to be a candy. It's going to be a gummy. It's going to be something completely different that I don't even have a clue. So, anyhow, I just want to, I want to urge caution when it comes to zoning of this, because this is kind of a zoning conversation. I think it matters how visible, how conspicuous, how saturated we are as a community with the number of retail locations. And I'm not concerned about there being retail locations. I think we just need to do them wisely and have them placed properly. And so I personally would love to see there be much more of a bubble around the schools, so that it's not, somebody who goes for an easy walk, if you're a high school student, an easy walk, which is honestly like 5 minutes and you're there. Like, I think if this, something is less than a quarter mile away, that's too close. It's too close. So you're asking for like an approximate distance. I think you ought to use a quarter mile as access is not a question. There's going to be access. I love going to the Food Truck Fridays. We got breweries here in town. It's fabulous. There are places here in town that are appropriate for measured use of marijuana and alcohol, and I think we just need to be conscientious about where those places are.
So do you feel like that if we make that quarter-mile restriction, do you think we should also restrict tobacco use and require that no tobacco within that same quarter mile? because it is so similar?
Or alcohol?
Well, just assuming that you're correct, that there is no correlation between.
I don't think tobacco is particularly healthy. I mean, I've been happy to see that the perception amongst youth has gone way up as far as the danger level for addiction and for nicotine use. Like teenagers now, it's been a huge public health victory that teenagers now see cigarettes as dangerous, as maybe even gross. That's been fabulous because it really has reduced an entire generation of cancer and other kinds of health risks that are associated with tobacco.
So you think it's okay to have cigarette smoking cigarette shops within 200 feet of a school, but marijuana use is a quarter mile away, and they would require no one under 21.
Cigarettes on the table here?
I'm giving you a hypothetical because
honestly, I don't think people ought to be smoking outside of schools either.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, the reality is, nicotine has a long history of being a legal drug in this community and in America. So people who are nurses. My wife is a nurse. Work at hospitals. They go outside for their smoke break. They're nurses, so they should know better. But they get to go outside the hospital and smoke. I'm sure there's school workers who probably smoke too. Of
course.
So I don't know what to do about that. I think it's probably a bad idea, but maybe not on the table for the zoning board tonight.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't know if you want to bundle them together at this time because we're just.
I don't know if you can, but I'm just saying I don't know how I don't want to say illegal may not be the right word, but how correct it is to make marijuana more restrictive than cigarettes when cigarettes are proven to be much more dangerous.
Yeah, well, I think that we just have to work with the marijuana question than cigarette question right now.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would say.
All right, Kindstone Pathways. I just wanted to mention something that isn't necessarily something that you as a board are going to regulate, but speaks to my vision of East Hampton and cannabis in the future. So one thing that I've been active in over the last almost 20 years now has been protecting farmland in East Hampton. And the state, when we legalized, divided marijuana into two types, psychoactive marijuana and hemp. Hemp, a farmer could plant 50 acres tomorrow and the state doesn't care because it's not a psychoactive substance. The problem is that there's no market for the hemp that they grow. So I have this fantasy, I guess, that at some point I would like to put together an informational meeting for farmers in the valley to educate them about what the possibilities are for growing hemp. I don't know the total number of uses, but there's just a huge spectrum of uses for hemp, that industrial and many other aspects of it. But they're not going to grow it unless there's a place to sell it. So because we have these beautiful empty factory buildings, not empty, excuse me, we have ample empty factory space. I would love to attract a hemp processor to East Hampton so that the farmers in the valley would have a place to sell their hemp, and we would have another thriving industry here. And in a way, I see it as kind of a 21st century version of the 18th, 19th century woolen industry or paper industry that we used to have in the valley, and we're just updating that now. And so here's something we can make paper from. We can make fiber, we can make cloth, et cetera, et cetera. Huge number of uses for it. So that's my larger vision for the future. And maybe someday it'll come true. And just one other tiny thing. I went to UMass in the late 60s, and there was some pot going around. I mean, there were guys that brought back weed from Southeast Asia that is stronger than any weed I've smoked lately. I mean, it was Thai sticks and, marijuana grown in tropical climates that was very strong. So the notion that oh, marijuana is so much stronger today, and people are, going to get in trouble with it, and the concentrates that are around now. They were smoking hash oil in the dorm when I was growing up, and going to UMass rather. So I just think it's a little bit of a alarmist tack to say that we really need to worry about modern marijuana. I don't. Yeah, sure. There's new ways that they've been making concentrates and so forth, but certain people are going to get in trouble with drugs. They're going to get in trouble with drugs, whether it's alcohol or opioids, and hopefully we can address this opioid crisis that we're in now. That's the real problem.
Yeah,
that's the biggest problem.
One of them.
All right.
I totally forgot. One thing I'd like to say is be wary in the future, all you guys, of can of fact and can of fiction. You're going to hear a lot of numbers. A lot of them didn't come from nowhere. A lot of them came from somewhere. So going forward, be very careful. Research your facts. Google be your friend. That being said, you're having an MGM casino, I heard, built locally. And you're going to create a huge public consumption, which is illegal thing if you don't have somewhere to do it. So just keep that in mind. It could be a destination where nobody has, no, I can't smoke. I'm from out of town right now. I'm from New Bedford and I don't have a house here. So I would love to have a place to go. Somebody that visited from the MGM. So you're going to force a lot of public consumption, and that's it. Just keep that in mind if you're thinking of having an on-site consumption. It's well needed, and it will bring your city's crime down instead of, the other. Thank you very much.
Salem?
Sorry. At the risk of droning on for too long. A couple things, though, that are important. So one of the things Denver did when it came to public consumption was they forced their areas out of town, like quarter mile and more, and like into industrial zones. And I would say that it doesn't make sense for us to make that mistake. We have a city that is amazingly bike friendly, amazingly pedestrian friendly. And I think that we should, we have a beautiful promenade. I think that we should capitalize on the investments that we've made. And you know what? One of the things that does, if you don't restrict certain areas of that are pedestrian friendly, then you're going to have less people driving. And that's a good thing. A couple of things, so I just want to put that out there. I'm a fan of the 200-foot rule. Another thing that is, talking about hospital visits and whatnot, I know that was mentioned. I just want to be really clear that THC is non-toxic to humans. You cannot overdose on THC. I'm a health teacher, I know this. You can't overdose on THC. So you could have as many edibles as you wanted, gummy bears or whatnot, and you would get extremely inebriated, but you would not lose consciousness. You would not stop breathing. Your heart would not stop. You would need to be put somewhere, in preferably a comfortable space, maybe with some music or food or something, and some water maybe. But it's not going to kill you. And I think that's a significant distinction that we need to, because we are recovering. I think we are recovering from the reefer madness mentality, and cannabis has been criminalized for a long time, and people are going to fight the decriminalization and the legalization of this because of what they feel, not because of what they know. And I think that's an important thing to put out there. And I think the final thing is, I think Marty said it really well, and this goes, I've done some research on this. In the 60s, when they confiscated marijuana, they'd throw it in a warehouse. It would sit for months before it was tested. They didn't have rapid testing. And that was the model, that was the paradigm for decades, where it would be confiscated, sit for months, open to the air, not stored properly. And guess what's going to happen if that cannabis gets tested after a few months? Think it's going to have a high THC content? There's been powerful marijuana, powerful cannabis since the beginning of time. They don't call assassins for nothing. They used hashish. Yeah. And that's pretty old. So I just wanted to say that.
Question: why was it a mistake for Denver to push the stuff?
Well, because then it has to. So it was a club-based model where you pay $5 to become a member, and then you can consume on site. But they pushed it to the outskirts, right. And when they pushed it to the outskirts, you're forced to drive.
You have to drive there.
You know, so I mean, you could Uber there, you could take a taxi, but why would we want to force people to drive in our city?
Yeah.
You know, so I'm a fan, especially of, you know, the fact that we have businesses that are open, vacant in our downtown.
Yep.
So I don't think it's wise to restrict if we do it right, if we're smart about this. I don't think it makes sense to restrict something that, as long as, here's what I don't want. I don't want people to be able to go to a dispensary, buy a few joints, and then come down here and smoke in front of families, where it's going to affect I don't want my family to, if I'm sitting down getting an ice cream from Mount Tom's, to have to, you know, be exposed to cannabis smoke, just like I don't want them exposed to cigar smoke, like I don't want them exposed to cigarette smoke. Same thing. It's about, you know, respecting other people's wishes to be able to coexist in the public square. I think that's important. But if you don't give people a place to consume, then you're forcing it.
Yeah.
And then people, guess what? There's irresponsible people in all walks of life. Whether it comes to alcohol, whether it comes to drugs, whether it comes to driving, whether it comes to whatever. There's irresponsible people that are selfish and don't care about other people. And they're gonna act a certain way, right? So if we can minimize the acceptance of people being out and open doing things and put that into a place where it's, you know, someone can have a comfortable space to use their medicine or to socialize. Cannabis is a social substance. And then last thing, I'm sorry I'm taking so much time. Good luck with regulating tobacco or alcohol. Not gonna happen. And I guarantee you'll all get calls from lawyers from the lobbies. I have been contacted from the tobacco lobby. I'm sure our planning department has been contacted because there was a little thing about, you know, making the smoking age 21.
Yeah.
I was contacted by a lawyer because you know, even though it wasn't even coming through the city council. So someone might get wind of this meeting talking about regulating alcohol, advertising. That's kind of regulated by, you know, the state. Tobacco, they're going to come right after you. And cannabis doesn't have a lobby.
Not yet.
So
you're going to lobby?
You know, like, let's be smart while we don't have to deal with lawsuits. You know, make it reasonable.
Why don't we go across the board and make everything 21?
I'd like to.
Good point.
I'd like to comment for the board that, the Denver legislation he's referring to is called Initiative 300. It's fascinating. They made a lot of mistakes, and I recommend to the board that they all Google Initiative 300 in Denver and learn about that. There's a lot of stuff they've done.
I just made a remark, and why don't we just go across the board 21?
Well, that's beyond.
And then
yeah, we're not.
That's beyond our purview here right now. So, is there anyone who wanted to speak that hasn't yet spoken?
I would.
Okay. Okay.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Belofsky. I've been a homeowner in East Hampton for 11 years this August, and it's my hope that I'll see a marijuana business on Cottage Street, on Main Street. I think we should bring this discussion out because teens are going to see it, and I don't want marijuana demonized as it has been in the past. And I think it would be a great idea if we held a showing of Reefer Madness for the town and have an open forum to let people see absolutely the ridiculousness that has been propagandized throughout these years. And I think it's really important, like Shelby was saying, that we not push it away and make it seedy and dark and undercover. I think that people should see that tax-paying, job-going citizens smoke marijuana. We're not here to vote on the legality. It passed. So I think it's really important that we do our best to have these discussions openly and with the information that we have in 2017 and not base it on ridiculousness that has gone beforehand, because I think in this modern age, we're not in the same place we were when we've discussed these issues, you know, in the country before. And my main point is that I don't want it hidden away. I think that kids can see people can smoke pot and be a fine citizen. I think it's good for kids to see that, actually. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Anybody else?
Just one, sorry, I know I've shared a lot. My final comment of the evening Directly relevant as you're making your planning board decisions and where you're going to zone recreational. Let's take a step back and looking at the law and the spirit of the Cannabis Control Commission's regulations. They make specific provisions for small businesses as well as local growers, and so a lot of it is not to look at huge investments and people coming with large backing and capital, but how can people such as myself find a viable path to having a place I can actually open up a recreational business. In the current existing zoning regulations, 10.9, I believe, right now, it basically, I may be summarizing, but it's either in the mill section, the industrial section, or along Route 10. One thing I'm really struck, as a small business person coming in, about the sheer amount of capital I need up front to develop these places out. I've visited some sites in the malls and a couple of the mills, and looking at where I have, what my options are, all of a sudden my budget is increased by $50,000 to $100,000 when I'm talking about putting up walls that don't exist in a mill. I would much rather, as a small business owner, have a turnkey shop. If at all there's any consideration, I would love to be in the cottage district or in some responsible way that works in the community, some kind of compromise we can find it. But just in keeping other folks, the small business community and other people in mind, please do consider that when you're zoning additional costs such as construction of facilities and walls and plumbing and all these sorts of things, the business owner will bear much of that cost. So it is a real concern, and I ask you to consider that as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
You mentioned a website.
Yeah, just so the recording gets you, if you can get that extra.
Could you just repeat the website that you mentioned?
Were we talking about the Initiative 300, the Denver? In Denver, the consumption law that they came up with, I don't know if law is the right word, legislation, you'll have to get the right. It's called Initiative 300. You can Google it. And Salem was referring to one of the aspects of it. They have many others. They required things like you had to get a community member, a business in the community, to write a letter of support for you. I think that may have been dropped in their final legislation, which has just come live. It got ballot voted in November, and then they started tweaking it. You know how this process works. But it's called Initiative 300 in Denver, and it's very long. Good luck.
One of the interesting things about that too that I read was that they couldn't have public consumption of marijuana where there was alcohol, right?
Yes.
But I think it was a restriction under the alcohol licenses, and I don't know how that works in Massachusetts, but that's an interesting thing, you can, at first blush, I think there were a lot of good points about, a bar that has both alcohol and marijuana, but then you hear the gentleman with the idea for the gourmet restaurant where you want to be able to use that and serve it in a place where you would also pair it with beer or wine. So I don't know what our liquor license is.
I think you meant
I like beer and wine. Like this chocolate kush goes great with cheese. I don't want
He doesn't want alcohol.
Gotcha.
And,
Okay.
and for the record, I'm also against that.
Yeah.
Thank you, brother.
Okay.
I'm actually not a big fan of alcohol.
What that does, comparing the two, is it takes a non-toxic substance that, admittedly anecdotally, but I'm a health researcher, that requires 1,500 pounds eaten within 15 minutes of THC in order to actually be at toxic levels, right? Impossible.
Yeah.
And it pairs it with something that'll kill you. Then you leave and you drive,
right?
And then you die, or terrible result. And then, it's marijuana that did it,
yeah,
or cannabis that did it.
Yeah.
No, very bad.
So, I think you were right at the beginning, Jim, that we should talk about what our next steps are. And my thoughts are, first of all, I would be curious to get Jessica Allen's thoughts on our initial question about the building off medical versus starting from scratch.
Right.
And I would propose that we ask her to do that for the next meeting, although with the understanding that I don't know what her schedule is like, and she's not here to talk about it. But I think that's one starting point. I also think that coming to our next meeting with some concrete thoughts about what, if any, restrictions that we would place. And so one of the things we've talked about, not so much at this meeting, but in the past, is there's 4 or 5, say, different kinds of uses that we've been talking about for recreational marijuana, and we may treat a facility that's purely growing marijuana different from an on-site consumption, different from a dispensary, and so it may be that we want to zone it in a specific zone for one use versus not another. The other restrictions we've talked about tonight have been the distance from a school, which I think we've heard a lot of different numbers thrown around. We've also got something in the medical regulation already about that. So I think it would make sense to come to our next meeting with some more concrete thoughts from each of us about sort of what we're thinking from that sense.
So you're talking about trying to nail in a statement of purpose, figuring out what the definitions of these types of businesses are, thinking about where we want to see them zoned and what the distance is, and those are the next objectives.
I think that would be I think that's sort of big picture. I mean, I think that there's a lot of what we had in our bylaw for medical was we didn't have to build as much around the sort of security and the transportation and the cash business and things like that. And I think we can probably assume that that's the case in the recreational side as well. So I don't know that we need to spend a whole lot of time. I certainly wouldn't want to spend time now worrying about that when we can worry about sort of the bigger picture things and see, assuming that the state is going to, I mean, the state's going to come out with regs before any of this goes live anyway. So if for some reason there's a gaping hole, I suppose it wouldn't be impossible to change it then. But those seem like the bigger picture items that are more appropriate for zoning
I
in
think
our
that
context.
if we were able to accomplish that at our next meeting and discussing those to the point where we can kind of narrow in on them, we might then be able to get the skeleton of an initial zoning document out that we could use as a working document.
That's what
I would
my
love
thought
to
is
get
if
a
we
working
can,
document.
and even if we can't have agreement on this, and Jamie's smiling, that these timelines may be a little optimistic,
Well,
but I think if we can talk about this, even if we come back next time and flesh it out a little more, then even if there isn't agreement on sort of what the distance from a school should be, we can start to fill in blanks. And again, I mean, the planning department is largely the one that's going to have to put this together, and so I think that you know, that may also take some time. But I'd be curious, at least from the planning department's perspective, and it may be that we have to flesh some of this stuff in before they can give a concrete answer on whether it's easier to slip it into the medical or start from scratch. But I think those seem like logical next steps to sort of keep the ball rolling.
I agree.
But we want to make sure that forget about Denver or any other. We want to make sure that we're putting this together for East Hampton and thinking about East Hampton. And we already have an idea of what some of the other states have done, and even some of the other cities are thinking about. So we can always incorporate some of that, but we have to think about, we're really closed in. Our schools are closer to retail stores. You know, we're really boxed in. So we have to be, I don't know if it's called more careful, but we have to watch where we're going to put these retail.
I think that's sort of one of the reasons for the tension here is that I think that the parts of town that people are excited to see these things coming, there's also parts of town that are really close to the schools and make people nervous. And I think it's going to be a matter of, you know, I mean,
we're a small community regardless.
Right.
We're tight.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and not only that, I mean, it's going to be, we've still got a lengthy process ahead of us. There's more, you know, it goes to the city council in the end. So, I mean, there's plenty of time for more input. And I think that
one piece, and I think that's right where we should go. I think you're spot on. But one piece that we did have time to digest, statement of purpose.
Yeah.
How do you all feel about how it's written?
I thought it was good, but before we move on to that, I just want a little quick sidebar. So the actions. I get the whole 10.9 versus 10.10 discussion, and we're working with Jessica. So we want to come to the next meeting with more thoughts on zoning and distances and all.
Yeah.
Are we tonight going to kind of digest? Like share what we've heard and what we think, or what we agree with, what we don't, what our thoughts are, to kind of like share what we're thinking after all this, so we can kind of digest what we're feeling.
I mean, you're certainly entitled to do that. I mean, that's totally fine.
I didn't know if that was okay.
Yeah.
Except for what the hell's up with that shirt?
Exactly. I noticed that too. I'm like, we have got to call each other before these meetings.
Yeah.
One of you has to go home and change.
Exactly. Yeah. Because I mean, I think we heard a bunch of amazing stuff here tonight that really has influenced my thinking throughout this whole thing, on both sides, and I'd like to share that with the board as
Please.
well, because I think that, I'd like to get your feedback on your opinions too, so we can kind of see where we're going. And then, but we can move to this purpose and need, or the statement of purpose.
I love what you're doing. Keep doing
Okay.
it.
So, I'll start.
Please.
I totally agree that I don't think any alcohol and marijuana should be in the same place. I think that's dangerous. I think speaking of someone that's partaken of both simultaneously and separately, I don't think it should happen at the same time. That's dangerous. I wonder about, there was a question, there was someone that said we should really consider the number of shops we're going to allow, and I don't think that really makes sense because it's a simple supply and demand. It's like the coffee shops or the nail salons we have in here. Once you get to a certain critical mass, there aren't going to be any more nail salons or coffee shops because they can't make a profit. And you see that happening with them going out of business or moving out. So I don't really see that we should limit the number of shops because that's going to take care of itself. I think that we should put an age restriction on even entering a facility, whether it's a consumption or a purchase or any other, whether it's manufactured, whatever it is, we should make sure that we put a 21, no one under 21. You can't be under 21 years old to even enter the place. You have to show your ID. I feel like that's important.
Right, that's even entering.
Yeah, I feel like it's important. I mean, I don't think that kids should be even allowed to have the ability to be to purchase it and be around it.
Well, we have to be careful on that too. You're going in with a 17-year-old just to go in to buy something and go back out.
He'll stay in the car.
Right. Okay.
It's okay. So, but I mean, well,
that's what I mean.
It's I'll talk about
not entering means
I'm
not
flexible
entering.
with all these are, but my other thing is there was concern about this becoming a marijuana destination city. I don't think that's a bad idea. I think that's kind of wonderful. So I'm okay with that. I think that it's discussing that this is a really beautiful downtown, and we should be careful and nervous about it not becoming a beautiful downtown. I know when I've smoked, things are a lot more beautiful. So I think that it would be wonderful to sit down on that bench after I've had a brownie and look at Mount Tom and see how gorgeous, even more beautiful it is. So I'm okay with that being a beautiful downtown. I think that's not at risk at all. So those are kind of where I'm going, and I kind of like the idea of the 10.9. And originally I was like, no, we should definitely make a separate 10.10. But I like the idea of kind of modifying 10.9 and just tweaking it if we can do that. But we should definitely talk to Jessica on that. Yeah. So those are my thoughts.
That's good.
I'll go next.
Cool.
I agree with everything you said.
Yay!
I definitely think that we should consider in our discussions consumption for zoning. So when we're creating definitions, I think it's important to create definitions of what kinds of businesses there are. We have them for the RMD and the UMD. I think we need to create definitions for what kind there are here, and I think adding consumption into our thinking, especially given some of what came before us and was spoken today, is something we should all think about.
Types of consumption or amount of consumption?
No, a business whose role is consumption. We have manufacturing, we have testing, but one of the definitions should be a business of type consumption so that it's specific. So that if you're trying to start up a business that has consumption, you can see I fit here and not have to be which one applies to me. We should be specific, we should be clear about it.
Yeah. Type.
Zoning, personally I happen to think that our mills are uniquely qualified for these kinds of businesses. I'd like to see some, especially the growing manufacturers in the mills. I think they are great. But I also agree that our downtown, especially on Cottage Street, for a restaurant, for something maybe, I would hesitate about a grow in one of those spaces, perhaps.
Yeah.
But I think mill and industrial is better for that. Highway business is better for that. But I think that for the actual retail component alone, be it consumption or sale, I think it's appropriate to have something in our downtown and Cottage and Union. I also think that I feel strongly about the signage as well. I want to keep it away from the kids. Our current research shows the best study we have, which came in 2015 out of Canada, and again, I'm a health researcher, shows that kids 14 to 15 that have smoked cannabis have shown a 20% decline in cognitive functions later in life. Kids 17 and above have not. There's obvious research, we've heard a lot of it, about the formation of the brain and being in the addiction industry that can occur into the late 20s, and some even say beyond. The only real evidence we have modern evidence by reputable sources and double-blind studies, that there's an effect is this one study. There's another study coming out that started in 2015 called the ABCD study. It's taking kids from 9 to 10 and following them for the next 10 years. So we've got some time before we'll see the results, and it's a 10,000 kid study compared to the 270 that were in this one I just referenced. But it does look like there is some influence on kids between 14 and 15. Looks like you're clear at 17. So for me, it is valid. It is reasonable to keep it away from the kids. I think 200 feet that we already have in the medical it's done. We already voted on it. That's the appropriate distance. And I think keeping the signage clear, if you have a business, it's a restaurant, it should have the kind of label a restaurant should have. It shouldn't have Cheech and Chong. It shouldn't have a big green pot leaf. None of that is necessary or essential
Simple.
to attract adults. None of that will attract adults.
Plain and simple.
But I know we have limitations of what we can't regulate on content. We had this huge signage law here and big debates and battles. Some of you have been through it, I'm sure. And we had to toss it all out because the Supreme Court said you can't regulate on content. And so now we're redoing our signage laws. I'm not sure.
It's
what
not
we can-
tossed out, but we're working on redoing it, yeah.
Coming up with something new. So that's a difficult thing, but I can say personally, I don't want to see the signage up front.
Can I make
So-
it just a
Yeah.
signage versus displays? There's a distinction, at least in my mind, especially if it's being applied for under a special permit for recreational cannabis. That a display is different than like the sign or advertising on a billboard, which would be where the sign regulation would cover is the regulation on a billboard, or you know the how big the words can be on the
A-frames and stuff.
Yeah.
Be a display. Can you explain that distinction?
Well, just like head use, like they're not allowed to put anything in their windows.
In their windows, yeah.
That would, you know, you can't have. I don't remember what the exact conditions were, but that was agreed on by the applicant, by the board,
Right.
and they don't. When you walk by, you know, other than the name, you don't necessarily know that they're selling pipes in there.
Right. Okay, that's good.
So we wouldn't have pipes in the window, or
Yeah, that's what they were saying. There'd be no tobacco use products in the window.
or you wouldn't have a tobacco leaf.
Right. So the display of goods being sold is different than
The sign itself, yep.
advertising
the logo
or off-site
Okay.
signage or things like that.
So if
That's
you're
a good-
selling that, you can display it.
I only have one more comment. One more, my final piece. I know I'm long-winded
Yeah,
here.
you took all that.
And that's about the bad behavior comments that we've had, driving while high and such. I also believe that we have a fine litmus test in the standard sobriety test. I also firmly believe that you shouldn't drive while under the influence of everything or anything, even things like sugar. But I don't mean to cite Mount Tom's. I think that, however, that frankly, and anecdotally, and I don't want to spread the wrong message, I know I'm in danger of doing that, that a stoned driver is a lot safer than a drunk driver. I worry about that less, but I do worry about it. I do think it's a public safety issue, and I want everybody to know that it is something I think about and that it's on my mind. And finally, smell. I think our zoning should have something about bad behavior of smell from cannabis in any form in its relation to its neighbors and to the surrounding area. I think smell is something we have to talk about.
Well, that was definitely part of the medical, the state regs, was that the ventilation system, and it can't be detectable from the outside and all of that.
Right.
That obviously becomes more complicated if we get into the on-site consumption stuff, but
Yeah,
I guess that's a few
because-
steps in the future anyways. So,
If you're gonna allow outside, cafes.
logistically, that poses some problems that may be site-specific, but, I mean, all we can do is think about that.
Well, we got enough to think about because.
No one else is daring?
You guys are pretty
Now, on,
comprehensive.
Union and Cottage, we're not gonna consider highway business.
Highway business? What does that mean?
No, that's business district.
Northampton,
Oh.
It's
we
not.
won't consider that at all,
Consider what?
having anything retail or anything.
Well, that's to be
I'd like
discussed.
to.
That's what I think is one of the
That's
points.
why, no one's brought it up, Northampton Street. Is that gonna be considered, or
Well, highway business is already zoned for the medical marijuana.
Right, so,
Right.
and if medical
Yes.
marijuana, they're
Special
considering wanting to sell, so we probably should,
Well, I think that that's one of the things we should come back and talk about at the next meeting is
Yeah.
sort of our thoughts for where and how it may be cited for different kinds of uses.
okay.
When is our next meeting?
Well, it's in the 15th, but we have a pretty full agenda for that.
That's a big,
Yeah.
that's gonna be full. We should have something that we wanna support this for a lighter
I
meeting.
put forth, and this isn't in an effort to rush, it's because I feel we are already in negligence and delay, and I know that's rude to some, but that's my feeling on it. I think we've waited too long, and I think, as Dick mentioned, you know, by February, we need to have something. And that may seem like it's a long ways off, but I know how these things go.
Yeah.
My recommendation is at the very least, leave it as an agenda and item, and if we don't have time at the end, then we can as a group push it off, as opposed to removing it as an agenda item altogether till a later date.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I think that's fine to put it on that agenda and see what else. I mean, we can just as easily put it to that next meeting in September and have a million things come up then too. So I mean, at
Sure.
some point,
Right.
we've got to keep moving
Well, I'll
forward.
agree with that, but I just think we should hopefully, well, the next meeting, I got a feeling it's gonna be heavy, but if we do,
That's reasonable.
I think in September, that would be very light, or maybe just a meeting for this specific.
Well, plus then it's like mid-September, because then it's...
September 5th, I think, is
Is
the
that what it is?
first one in
Yes.
September.
Okay.
I got a feeling it's gonna be that anyway.
Yeah.
It
We
may
can still
be.
put
I
on the
mean, my
agenda
only
and see.
reluctance to putting it on the next meeting and kicking it is I will expect a large turnout again, and I hate to have 40 people show up and then sit through a 2-hour hearing and then tell them that we're not going to get to it and they
Yeah.
should go home and come back in 3 weeks. But
Right.
I also see Jim's point about, I think we can set these things aside and then look around in 2 months and realize we haven't done anything.
Exactly.
I think
No,
everyone
agree.
in the room is willing to do the time to make this happen.
Okay. Any other
Okay.
thoughts on what we heard tonight from anyone else?
No, the only,
No.
the only thing that I put in was Northampton Street,
Yeah,
because
okay.
everything
Yeah,
else, I think we were all thinking about anyways.
Yes, let's move
Yeah,
on.
so I think, when we did part of our sign ordinance and when we did the other one, I think that it's helpful when we can tell the planning department that this is something we like in there, with the
Yeah.
caveat, obviously, that it's not getting voted on
Can
until
get
the whole
tweaked.
thing is done anyways. So, I think just to sort of giving a general sense to the planning department and the community of what we think, I'm happy to take, I guess, a vote in support or against it, and if people,
Can I just ask
or just a straw poll.
forgive me, but I don't understand the phrase unreasonably impracticable.
Yeah, I
I've
think
never
it's supposed
actually
to be
used that word.
impractical.
Okay,
Impractical.
good, because I've never seen that word, and I was like, okay.
Impractical.
Impractical.
Impracticable, no, I think that is right. Impractical is.
Is it?
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
what is it?
I think
It's
I did
basically unable to be
Unreasonable.
implemented, kind of thing.
Is it?
That term
Unreasonably.
is defined in the statute.
Yeah.
That's where I got it from.
Okay.
What does
Looking
it,
at
what does
that
it
going,
mean?
that doesn't work.
Unreasonably impracticable.
It means that you can't impose rules that are so tough that no reasonable person would go into the business.
Okay. The response is that it means that you cannot, just for the record, because you probably didn't hear you, that you cannot impose rules that are too tough that you can't meet them.
Right. So it would be like a backdoor prohibition by a condition.
Yep.
Right.
This is allowed here, but only if you put in a private airport or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, do people just want to generally say whether they're generally in support of this statement or not?
Yeah.
Or does anybody
Right.
have any objections to the language at this point?
No, I think it's
No, I think it's fine.
Harry, any thoughts?
Do you want to read it again for everybody now that we've had this long discussion for the
Sure.
record?
Okay.
So statement of purpose is written as to provide safe and effective access to recreational cannabis in East Hampton per Chapter 334 of the Acts of 2016 and General Laws Chapter 94G, Sections 2 and 13, and to regulate the time, place, and manner of operation of cannabis establishments in a manner that promotes the character of East Hampton and that is not, quote, unreasonably impracticable, end quote, and does not otherwise conflict with the Act.
And 2 and 13 are the limitations and the penalties sections.
Okay.
All right.
All right, I mean, is there a
So-
vote, or do we?
No, I don't
just-
think we need to vote on this.
Okay.
We're gonna vote on the
So
final.
we're all in
First piece in our
agreement. and-
proposed zoning.
So,
Let's go smoke.
All right.
so
Can I make a motion to adjourn?
the language, I don't believe it's on our website yet.
Yeah. When will it go on?
Problem is, it comes with all of my other
Here you
notes
go.
and thoughts.
Yeah, I don't think we should take it.
Yeah.
Why don't we clean it up, put it on the website, and then you can see it.
Yeah, that'll be good.
It'll be put on the website, what, in about,
Well, I don't know, we gotta get it.
Yeah, that has your personal information on it. It has your
Yeah,
email
better
address.
not
It's
to.
got
No,
a
no.
lot of.
All right, so
information on
we
there.
will, I guess, continue this further discussion. We'll put it on the agenda for the next meeting.
I'd
Yeah.
like to make a motion.
That works.
So do we make a
All right.
motion to continue it to, or does this need to have a motion? since
I
not
think
a
it's
public
gonna
hearing?
be, it's just gonna be a new
Okay.
administrative item for the next
Right.
one. We don't
I'm
need
not
to-
even
All
gonna say
right.
second anything.
Any other administrative items we need to discuss?
No, I'll make a motion, we adjourn.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Thank you all very much. Hope to see you in the future hearing.